Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Charity Commission's announced it will look into the Institute of Economic Affairs think tank after concerns were raised about its political independence and funding. The Institute's Director General, Mark Littlewood, was filmed by an undercover reporter working for Unearthed, an arm of Greenpeace, and was making a series of claims, including that the organisation helped 2 US visitors meet peers and MPs, including the then Brexit Minister Steve Baker. Now, the reporter, who posed as a representative of a US beef hormone investor, was told that a donor could not influence conclusions, but suggested substantial content would be included if they funded it. So is this just how the think tank industry works, or should we fear backroom Brexit talks paid for by overseas donors?
And in fact, the guys running our international trade team, I mean, I know Gove quite well, but the people running our international trade team are talking to him nearly, well, I wouldn't say every day, but definitely once every 3 or 4 days, along with David Davis, Boris Johnson, Liam Fox.
The IEA sting highlights an important issue in our public life: the interaction of think tanks and our transparency laws. In recent decades, there's been a rise in prominence for what one might call the super think tanks. This is the King's Fund. Just check out the office. It's very well funded. It has a staff of experts. It's in the same sort of category as the Institute for Fiscal Studies or the Institute for Government. These are all bodies which are incredibly well respected and non-partisan, if a bit establishment. But these aren't the only think tanks. We also have lots of smaller bodies which are generally more partisan. The New Economics Foundation, Policy Exchange, IPPR, and yes, the IEA. Their reports are more willing to argue against consensus, but they're more likely to employ and publish people with more limited expertise. The IEA has another issue which is more common in these more partisan think tanks. It's very opaque. It gets the lowest possible rating on the Who Funds You Transparency Index. Now that's permitted, but it raises a question. Let's say that I'm an executive at a tobacco company and I want to lobby some ministers about a change in the law. I can go in myself and lobby ministers if they'll take a meeting, but the thing is, you can find out about that meeting via the Freedom of Information Act. I might try and get round that by hiring a lobbyist to go on my behalf, but in recent years, lobbyists have had to disclose who their clients are. Think tanks are a problem for this area of the law, because if I give money to a think tank who organises a dinner for me and writes a report in support of my views, there's no need for them to declare that interest. The IEA says that's not what's been happening here. The comments published this week, they say, are selective and taken out of context. Traditionally, Britain's legal approach has been that we should judge if think tanks are good or bad on the merit of their work, not on the basis of their funding. But in a world with so much transparency in our public sphere, that position looks harder to defend.
That was Chris Cook, and joining us down the line now is Shankar Singham, who works with the IEA. He's been referred to as the Brexiteers' brain. Nice to have you on the programme, Shankar Singham. Mark Littlewood said on that recorded tape that his institute was in the Brexit influencing game, his words. Now, I know the IEA thinks of itself as an educational charity. The Charity Commission is now investigating it. It says you cannot exist for a political aim. Now, how do you square those two?
Well, I think you have to differentiate between think tanks that are involved in policy work and therefore are politically engaged by definition, and partisanship. So a charity is not allowed to be partisan. We're not allowed to advocate on behalf of a particular political party, but we are absolutely allowed to be politically engaged, because otherwise, if you are a policy in the policy world, you would want to have your policy work, your expertise, your reports implemented ultimately by government. If you don't want that, then you don't deserve to exist as a think tank.
That advocacy question is very difficult, though, isn't it? Because Mark Littlewood boasted that you were writing Gove and Johnson's scripts on leaving the customs union. Now, if that isn't advocacy, if that isn't political interference, then I don't know what is. You did that under the name of the charity?
No, so just to be clear, the charity, the IEA, has been advocating for free trade and free markets for 63 years. If you look back at all the work of the IEA in that period, you will see a complete commitment. It won't differ in any way.
I understand.
Free
I'm
trade
not
and free
talking about your
markets are the way
philosophies, and I'm not talking
people
about your
out poverty.
ideologies. I'm talking about the fact that Mark Littlewood boasted in that tape that you were writing Gove and Johnson scripts on leaving the customs union. The perception is that you were being promoted, sold even, as somebody who could help them influence political change in the UK. You had the ear of the Secretaries of State in the Brexit business.
Well, we have produced a number of reports. The British people voted, as you know, in the referendum to leave the European Union. Our work is based on how do you leave the European Union well? How do you embrace the rest of the world well? I have 25 years of experience doing trade policy, regulatory competition policy, and I wanted to make that expertise available to as many people as we possibly could, stakeholders in this process.
Okay, but forgive me, it's not just making your expertise available. You were meeting, and we heard on that tape, you were meeting with David Davis, with Boris Johnson, with Liam Fox. He said, Gove, not every day, but every 3 or 4 days. Now, if that is true, you had ministers' ears and you were introducing them to foreign donors. You were giving them key access to key ministers, and they were unnamed foreign donors.
Well, first of all, we weren't meeting them on a frequent basis as that. But the point is that we meet with the point is that we make our reports available to ministers. We don't control ministers. We don't tell ministers they can't speak to anyone else. Many think tanks talk to cabinet ministers, talk to ministers and parliamentarians and other people on a regular basis. We are no different from other think tanks in that respect.
Undercover reporter,
if ministers want to hear,
I understand.
If ministers want to hear from other people,
but it's not
they
about
are perfectly able to hear from other people.
But you're being disingenuous. That undercover reporter was offered 4 seats at the table, including one next to the minister. If he paid up, he was posing as an American beef hormone investor, and he was promised that kind of access. Now, how often were you seeing these secretaries of state?
You can check the transparency register, as many people have done, and you will see exactly how many times I've met
Actually,
with,
you can't.
Actually,
you can't. Because
yes, you can.
Well, no, because if you're a consultant lobbyist,
yes, you can.
Well, you can't check to see how often.
We're not a consultant lobbyist.
That's what I mean. So you don't have to declare. You don't have to declare how often you are meeting ministers.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. When we go in and when I meet with ministers, it is on the transparency register. It is the IEA and myself meeting those ministers. You can check, as many people have done, by the way, and they have done.
Well, Mark Littlewood
FOIs
said
asked,
essentially he was a cover for you.
And no, well, that is not true at all. He did not say that. In fact, there has never been a meeting that I have gone into with ministers or cabinet ministers where Mark has gone in claiming to be IEA, and I know this is the allegation that was in The Guardian. That has never, ever happened. When I go to meet with ministers, it's in the transparency register. You can look at those meetings. What I say in those meetings is exactly what I say in all of our reports, which is advocacy of free trade and free markets and the ability to maximise the opportunities of Brexit and minimise the disruptions, which is the only way that this is a positive process.
But I'm talking about the way you operate. You fail that transparency test, you get an E. You're right at the bottom. Now, if you are confident with who you do business with, why don't you make it absolutely clear who funds you, who pays for you?
Right, so I started with the IEA in March of this year, and I understand the IEA has a long-standing policy not to reveal its donors. And I understand why they have that policy, because freedom of association, the ability of people to have their privacy protected, is a very important part of any free society. And I respect that, and I think that's a reasonable thing to do, and that is the reason for their policy. There are many, many institutions, many groups that do not reveal their members because they are protecting the privacy of their members.
You're
it is
talking
much
about
more
a free
important
society, and
to deal with
Sorry, and I understand you're talking about a free society, and that goes hand in hand with free trade, but I'm asking you to help me here, to stand back and look at the perception of this revolving door which spins you from American lobby donors to top UK government ministers, and you now working for the IEA. You've got to admit it tastes really funny. If voters knew that Brexit was being influenced or could be influenced by foreign donors paying their way to get right next to Michael Gove or Boris Johnson at a dinner through you, they'd be horrified.
Well, first of all, government ministers from the UK travel around the world. They meet with these people on a regular basis. They meet with other countries' trade associations. They meet with companies from other countries on a regular basis. All we are doing is setting out what we think makes sense in terms of a free trade and free market oriented approach to the Brexit situation that the UK faces itself. It is a massive issue for this country. We think ministers should be as advised as they possibly can be. We do not say that ministers should talk to no one but us. I am sure there are a lot of other people who talk to Michael Gove, who talk to other people.
Just confirm to me.
And I'm sure that his positions are very different from
Did you write that note that went to Theresa May, signed by Boris Johnson and Michael Gove? Did you write that letter?
No, I did not write that note.
So that's a firm denial that the letter that went to Theresa May instructing her on how to do a hard Brexit was penned by you?
I did not write that letter.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us this evening.